Amen. We're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 2, and we're going to read verses 9 and 10. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. One of the great questions of our world, of our lives, should be, who am I? Who am I? It was interesting. A couple weeks ago, the men took a retreat, and as we sat in a circle, there was a fire and good drinks and just good times. And some of the guys had been together for almost 24 hours and had hiked and all kinds of stuff. And so there was some of the barriers, some of the stuff that started to fall down, and guys began to talk, as prone to happen. It was interesting to me. I sort of knew this was coming. I know that this is one of the things I think about. And as we began to think about who am I, as we begin to reveal ourselves, the thing that came most easily to the men, in fact, the question that came most easily was, what do you do? What do you do for a living? What's your job? And it was an interesting, right? It was a collection. Nobody in the room did the same job. There were different jobs. And we sat around and we talked, and we didn't just go, here's what I do, but guys began to explain to us what that meant, what their actual day looked like. What kinds of stuff are you doing? And some of it was fascinating. So, right, some of it is somebody even gave us a little history of his profession. It was fascinating stuff. But that, for most of us, not just men, but I think women too, that who am I becomes, what do I do? What's my profession? What's my occupation, right? You might say, well, Jerry, and if you introduced me and somebody said, well, who is this? Oh, this is my pastor, right? It might even be, this is my friend, but this is my pastor. And the question, right, people love to ask pastors is, well, what do you do, the rest of the week? You talk for an hour on Sundays, like that must take you about 6 minutes to get ready. We've heard you preach. Like, what are you doing the rest of the time? What do you do? And so I'm a dad and a husband and a pastor right. Sometimes you guys know sometimes I coach lacrosse. We do stuff, but does that really answer who am I? And if we're honest, if we really let ourselves start to ponder and wrestle, who am I? I think culturally we avoid this. Right? We all know there's some of those people that we have in our circles who are good at asking sort of those probing, get underneath the surfacey, here's what I do for a living, down to the underneath. And those people who are good at asking those incisive, right, those questions at the beginning, right? Sometimes we avoid them on purpose because we don't want people to mess with our feelings. And often I think the reason that we don't want to have that conversation, we don't want people to mess with those feelings, is because we don't have good answers to those questions. We've become a culture, though, right, of labels, right? Labels of stuff that when we think about who we are, some of those labels are fixed things, right? Sometimes those labels are things like race and nationality. Some of those things are very fluid. Political parties, sports teams, the news channel that we prefer to watch, our socioeconomic status. For some of us, it's the coffee that we drink or the relationship status that we possess. But the thing that becomes dangerous is sometimes, right, some of those, maybe in most of those things, can and do change. Right? If the thing that defines who I am is the stuff that I do, and on a daily basis, what I am is a mom who gets up every morning, right, and I get my kids ready, and I get them out the door and onto the bus, and make sure that their paper is done, and make sure that their lunch was packed, and all of a sudden that kid carelessly goes on and graduates. And then, I was going to make a joke about my mom and how many times we've all lived in her basement, right? But at some point they do leave your basement. For me, I'm 37, but that's a true story in case anybody's You can laugh. It's not that funny to me. Right? If that's how we define, when that changes, right, we can often be undone. There was an interesting thing that was a scientific study came out at the beginning of this year in 2018. The age of men and their dying, if you look at a chart, there's this really, really weird little bump at 62. 62, you might think, well, why 62? Because the back end of life, right, where the lifespan of Americans is extending as healthcare improves, right, and some of that stuff in nutrition and exercise, we understand. The actual lifespan of Americans is but there's this weird new bump that has come at 62. And that is the forced retirement age of guys who used to be in manufacturing jobs and now can all of a sudden, at that point, they've lost their manufacturing jobs because manufacturing has by and large gone away here in the United States. And they have, right, they can retire and begin to take Social Security at 62. But what happens to them? They don't know who they are. And this it's not a Jesus study. This isn't, the church didn't do this, and Jerry certainly didn't do the science website. It was in Forbes magazine. Weird bump at 62. Why? Because all of a sudden, these men have come home to wives that by and large they don't know. And the thing that is defined and dominated and dictated their entire lives, who am I, has been their job, and they don't have it anymore. And so they've taken 2 vacations to see the grandkids, and now they're sitting in their home all day long, and they've found, like the study prompted some more study, and they begin to engage in unhealthy health patterns because they're stuck at home and they don't know what to do with themselves. And there's this weird, odd little bump. It's an identity issue. And that is where we face. Now, you may be asking yourself, I hope you're asking yourself, what in the world does this have to do with holiness? Because that's what we spent our weeks thinking about. When we started, we said it's not safe to start a conversation about holiness with who? With ourselves. We've got to start the conversation about holiness with God himself and his character and his identity and his reality, that he is wholly other, that he is this imposing grandeur, this majestic thing, this morally pure thing that as we gaze at, as we see, as we understand it, it should reveal to us our own deep need. The reality that we are not that. There should be a catch in our throat, right? That as we see that is not who we are. And that in comparison to him, we are lost and broken and damaged. But as we sort of have drilled down and we've gone sort of layer under layer and we've started at him and we're getting closer and closer to our own holiness, what becomes abundantly clear to us, right, is we're not holy. We're not holy. And for many of us, again, if we had asked the question at the beginning, and I hope I've done a good enough job over the last month or so that we're not maybe at the same place, but a month ago, if we had said, what about your holiness? The question we would have started to ask ourselves, what am I doing that isn't holy? What are my actions? What am I watching? What am I seeing? What am I saying? What am I feeling? Right? What am I thinking that isn't holy? What am I doing where my unholiness is being revealed? But I want us to begin. I hope we've been driving in the direction that you can start to ask yourself. You can start to see that my holiness is a reflection of who I am. That the stuff that I do and the way that I do it is a reflection of who I actually am. It's a revealing of that. It doesn't work the other way. I think much of our trouble, much of our difficulty in understanding our holiness is we go the other way. We go, here's the stuff that I do, here's my actions and my attitudes and my thoughts, right? And this, and we let that be the definer of our who am I? And consequently, right, we're a distressed, frustrated, people because we just see all the failure and the brokenness and the sin. Let's look at 1 Peter chapter 2. We're just going to work our way through the sort of phrase by phrase, line by line, as it were. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. Now, if you're underlining, if you've got your own Bible and you want to underline, this is one of those spots I would underline. This is who we are. Do you notice in the who am I, you are chosen race, royal priesthood, holy nation, people for his own possessions. There's no doing in there. Just who am I statements. What does it mean to be a chosen race? I think it's helpful, right? We start, this is a corporate, this is a group. When he begins to identify who am I, it is a group, a race, a new race of people, chosen people. And that this new race of people crosses all of those weird lines that we tend to draw. Right? There's no sense of the color of your skin or the nationality or the place that you were born, your political party, socioeconomic status, the language that you speak. The people of Jesus are simply a chosen race. The key characteristic, the one defining part of that race is chosen. That God himself, before time, right? If we remember back a couple weeks ago, the elect, in his foreknowledge, right? He predestined. He chose who the nation would be. That God chooses them. That is the characteristic. He looks at you as you are. I think this is really important. God saw you. Right? We've got to hold God in his omniness, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, like all of that. That's who God is. That's who he's always been. He knows exactly who you are. He didn't choose you on some basis down the road. He chose you exactly as you were. He saw you as you actually are. He had seen all of the quiet, dark, dirty, all of your best moments. And he chose you. Now there's some implications in there, right? For us, on a weekly basis, when we pass the peace, Kendall tries to communicate that to us, that whatever the barrier, whatever the thing that we might think about, that we might have, that we think separates us, that we should be passing the peace to all of the people in the room. That there are no longer any of those things that are actually dividing us. This should mean to us that we are more this chosen race than we are American. That we should love our country, hear me, celebrate the 4th of July, light off a firecracker. But recognize that your brother and sister in Iran, in Syria or Croatia or Cambodia or Canada or Venezuela, that in every country, people of every color of skin and political party are more your family than the person who doesn't know Jesus who lives next to you, who happened to vote the same as you did in the last election. We're a chosen race. We're also a royal priesthood. Now, I don't really get the royal thing, to be honest. I didn't have any grand compulsion to watch a royal wedding. I think that it is spectacular that we left behind a king who taxed us without representation. We've become a nation that taxes us without representation. That's a whole nother political conversation that doesn't want to divide us. So, you're a royal. For those of you that want to be, guess what? You are. That's what Peter just said to us. You're a royal priesthood. But the royalty, right? We've been adopted into the king's family. But into the king's family priesthood. Now, what was a priest? A priest was the person that had access to God himself. In the Old Testament, the priests were the only people, right, who could go into certain parts of the temple. They were the only people who could offer particular kinds of sacrifices. They were the only ones who could actually see the ark and the stuff, and only then, only at certain times, only at particular moments would they even have that sort of access. And so when Peter says to us, you're part of this royal priesthood, he's saying you're part of the family access to the Father. You've got access. You can walk into the throne room at any point in time. All of the barriers, right? It's not just barriers that were between us that have been broken, but it's barriers between us and God that have been broken. And so now we get to walk in on a regular basis into the King's presence. And our lives are lived out in that presence, all of the moments. Right? Again, that's why we start with the omni-God, right? This omnipresent, everywhere God who knows everything and sees everything, right? We are worshiping, serving in that place. That's the royal priesthood. No part, no time, no corner of our lives aren't done in his presence, under his gaze. We are constantly with him, continually close to him. And what that means is that the whole of our lives become worship. All of the things that we do, right? We tend to think about, right, that this is a worship service or a worship gathering, depending on what vernacular you like. That we gather, and we tend to think of worship as singing. Maybe as praying, and occasionally, right, if we're maybe even as listening to the sermon feels like worship, but 11:30 is going to come and the worship is going to be over, and then we're going to go about our lives. Right? And we're going to go eat lunch, and we're going to go to this practice, and we're going to go to watch this TV show, and we're going to do life. And what this is saying to us is that all of our lives is priestly. That we are collectively in the very presence of God. And that not just this hour and a half on Sunday morning, but the way we eat lunch and the way we go to practice and the way we go to work on Monday morning and the way we parent our children, it's priestly. It's close to the Father. It's done in worship. It's done with him in mind. It's done with the reality of his presence in our day in and day out. We're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Again, each of these are corporate, not individual things. We are a very individual people. Again, as we think about who am I, what's my identity, we think very individualistically. I'm Jerry, I'm 5'11", I weigh X. You can speculate if you'd like, it's fine. I weigh this, right? My mom's name was that. I'm married to this woman. I live on this street. We think very individually about who you are. That's not how Peter thinks about it. Think about who Peter was. Think about what we know of Peter when he first began to be in the presence of Jesus. Peter was very individual. Peter's one of the guys, right, that he's going, listen, when you come in, when you're king, Peter, I get to sit in this chair right here. I get to hold this kind of position. I get to be this kind of thing. And now, right, the cross, the reality of the gospel has so transformed him that now he just thinks about himself and the church and us as this corporate thing that we're now a people for a holy nation is where we're at. God is saying we're part of something. And what that means, right, there's implication to these. We might, some of us in this room would go, I'm part of Journey Fellowship. This is we're okay with corporate. We go, this is part of my thing. Over the last 5 or 6 weeks, we've had a couple different guys from our broader church family called Acts 29, it's Church Planning Network. Michael came from Hamilton, Kurt came from Cincinnati. They came and preached and spoke to us. We've got brothers and sisters. Some of us a couple weeks ago were down. We gathered with our A29 family for a conference, and that's true. I believe they are our brothers. They're part of this holy nation. But for any legitimate follower of Jesus who attends Sunbury Christian, they're part of the holy nation. Down and around the corner, Sunbury United Methodist. Anybody that's following Jesus there, part of the holy nation. You go down the street, right? You get to the Vineyard Church, part of the holy nation. You go down into Westerville, you pick the church. If they're a follower of Jesus, they're part of the holy nation. We're part of something much bigger, much broader, much more expansive than our tiny little corner. And that's a really good thing, right? It's part of why I participate, and I encourage you to come on Tuesday night to part of the Big Walnut Ministerial Association's Thanksgiving service. Because you get to see there are people, faithful people in other places who gather and love the name of Jesus and want to sing and pray and talk and preach. Come and participate. All over the region, the state, the country, right? Our continent. There are brothers and sisters that are part of this holy nation. And it's bigger than being Acts 29 or Baptist or Protestant or, right? If you're a believer in Jesus, washed in his blood, they are our brothers and sisters. The holy nation, a people for his possession. Now, some of us would not care very much for that, right? We don't like the idea that we are possessed by someone. That someone sort of has, right? Because it implies ownership. It implies rulership. It implies that he gets to make decisions for us. All of those are true, by the way. Feels weird. But there's more than that to it. What it is saying is that we are his. And what do you do with the things that are yours? Do you protect them? Do you care for them? Do you watch over them? Do you provide for them? Right? There's more there. We tend to sort of focus on what feels like the negative side, but catch that we are his possession. That he is for us. That he is for our joy. That we are, right? I mean, when we read Psalm 23 and it says that he walks with us through the valley of the shadow, that's because we're his people. We're his possession. We're his. He's going to walk all of the roads, all of the places. Good days, bad days, hard days, joyous days. We are his. And he's jealous for us. My boys like video games. At our house, there is one Xbox. And the game that the boys have been enjoying playing lately is not a team game. Multiple people cannot play at the same house at the same time. So they have to rotate and take turns, and so it makes whose controller is whose and who has what batteries important. And they are jealous for their possession. They do not like it when somebody else touches it, talks about it, thinks about it, right? They can walk into the room and like a scuffle can break out because someone was touching. They can't be using the controllers at the same time, but they're distressed, right? Because why? Because in their mind, it's their possession. And that's how the Father feels about us. We're his. Nobody else gets to possess us. We don't get to be anybody else's. We're his. We're never out of his hand, never out of his sight. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about that if we can see this and see that this is not just a momentary thing, right? We're not just momentarily his. We're not just 40 years or 62 years or 85 years his, but we are 50 trillion years his. Not 50,000, not 500,000 or 5 million, 5 billion, or even 50 trillion. But we are eternally his. Doesn't that shift, right? Shouldn't that move how we think about us and the circumstances and what he has allowed and the road that we're walking? We're his. So as a Christian, as a follower and a pursuer, as a redeemed one, we are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. Peter starts, just used to preach another. Peter starts with who we are long before he gets to what we do. Because what we do is going to flow out of who we are. So let's keep reading. A chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may what? Here, all of a sudden, here we go. Here's my doing. so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. That's our job description. I, part of the chosen race, royal priesthood, possessed people, a royal co-heir with Jesus, transcending my skin color, language, bank account, in his presence, right? My whole life full of worship, every moment access to that Father. That qualifies me. That calls me to something. And that something is to declare his excellencies. And specifically, right, because he's got a lot of excellencies. He's an omni-God. It's big, huge, magnificent who he is. His excellencies are that great. It's like, go declare the excellencies of the Grand Canyon. Well, which part of it? Which depth? Which height? Which width? No, he says, here's the excellency to which you are to proclaim. His calling us out of darkness and into light. His calling us out of the darkness and into the light. I appreciated what Kurt had to say to us last week. I, too, spent a portion of my ministry life convinced that there were certain ways to change, that discipleship looked a certain way. And the joy of recognizing that what we are called to is the proclamation of the excellency of his calling us out of darkness and into the light. We aren't called to proclaim the excellency of great theologic knowledge, though I promote theologic knowledge and have a master's degree in theology. The calling out of darkness and into the marvelous light is the thing that we should be doing. He sent his Son, his precious, only begotten Son, Jesus, into our world, into this world. This sinful, broken, dark world. And Jesus came, right? He came as a tiny baby. We're going to walk very quickly in the next month or so, right, into that reality. We're going to be talking about it. We're actually, over the next month of December, going to be talking about the mothers of Jesus, some of those women along the way, the significance of that genealogy and the women and their faithfulness that got us to Jesus. But that Jesus walked into this world and lived perfectly, sinlessly, sacrificially. And that life, that perfect, sinless, sacrificial life, so offended the self-righteous religious folks that they wanted to kill him, that they plotted his murder and his demise, that they sought it out. They schemed and worked and tricked, right, and to the spot where they got him there. To the cross, nailed to the tree, naked, beaten, bloody, pinned there. But that Jesus, think about this with me, right? That Jesus is still this omni-God. By the power of his own will, the very molecules of the tree he was being hung on were holding together. That at any moment he could have, right? It says he could have called down angels. He could have simply spoken the word and undone all of it, but he allowed himself to be right there to the point of death. And not just to the point of death, but that he might be buried, that he might stay in the tomb, and that he might then rise, right, in power and in glory. Do you notice that where Jesus went, he went into the darkness and came out what? Into the marvelous light, so that he might do that with us. And the Father accepted his death as the payment for my darkness, as sacrifice to cover my guilt. And just like Jesus walked out of the tomb into the light of day, we are being called out of the dark into the glorious light. And we get to tell people. We get to tell people. Sometimes, right, when somebody starts talking about evangelism, somebody starts talking about, like, are you being a good witness? Are you doing, it's this, like, burden. We invited some people over to our house this week to have some dinner and enjoy and just relax. And some of you know I enjoy smoking, not literal smoking, but smoking food. Got a smoker for my birthday in April. And so I was very excited. It's Thanksgiving week, so I don't feel nearly this bad. You're going to be hungry when I'm done. I brined this maple bourbon glazed turkey that was gloriously good. But the best part of the night was the apple crisp. Now, the recipe called for honey, but what I found was some maple syrup that had been stored in bourbon barrels, and so it was infused with the special goodness that comes only from a bourbon barrel into maple syrup. I'm really pro-Jesus, and I think Jesus is the best thing ever. Bourbon barrel infused maple syrup will change your life. Meg and I were at Costco on, I think it was Friday night, and we walked by the bourbon barrel infused maple syrup, and some guy was looking at it, and he was trying to decide. You could just tell. And I just flat out stopped and said, dude, it will change your life. Don't think, just put it in your cart. I love the stuff. It's like the bottle. I bought it 4 days ago. It's a third of the way gone. Go to Costco, buy yourself some. Bourbon barrel, maple syrup. Do not give it to your kids. Save it for yourself. Or make a spectacular apple crisp with it. Okay. Do you know what I have no problem with? Telling you about things I love. That's not torture. It's not hard. I didn't walk by and see that guy there and go, I don't know. He might be offended if I tell him to buy that. That's right. If we're captured, if we're in love with Jesus, if we see ourselves called out of darkness into glorious light, if we recognize, right, in comparison to his holiness, here's who we were, and we've been called out of that transformed move. Our whole eternity has been reshaped. Then telling someone, that just becomes like talking about bourbon barrel infused maple syrup. The God who saved me, called me, named me, put me in his family, gave me an inheritance, invited me into his presence in his priesthood, chose me, this God who has declared that I am his and he is mine. And our singular job description out of that? Our singular job description out of that. Do you notice, Peter doesn't start going, so stop watching this and stop going there and stop doing this. Right? He doesn't give us this list of things. He just goes, just go. Let people see that you've been called out of darkness and into the light. Proclaim the excellencies of him. So how do we do it, right? I mean, that's the thing. I mean, some of us, we want some practical stuff. So let me give us some practical stuff. I think it's important to see that our job is not to simply walk around going, hey, you over there doing that thing, stop. And again, I think that for some of us, that's what the church has got. That's what people think about us. And I think some of the reason that they think that about us is because that's what we've done. Because we like to look at people who sin in a way that's different than us and go, hey, stop doing that. But that's not what Peter said our job was. He says, go declare the excellencies of the one who called us out of darkness and into light. We get to declare it. We get to come be a royal. We come to gain an inheritance, find a family, a nation, a people. And what we're then saying to people as we declare those excellencies is, hey, come be a part of this thing that's spectacular. Come taste this. Come recognize that your 50-year, 500-year, 500,000-year, 50 trillion-year eternity has been secured. When we get this, on a personal level, sin stops being quite so sweet. The thing that we're doing, that we've been longing for, there's a famous quote that, right, it takes an extraordinary love to cast out a deep sin. That's where Peter's calling us. Be so in love with the excellencies of him, calling you out that sin pales in comparison. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand. I'm not saying that somehow this is easy to tell people. Folks are not typically overjoyed at being told that, right? The lives that they've been working really hard. They've been building this life. They've been doing this stuff. They've got these cultural identities and these labels and these stickers that they've stuck to their NASCAR, and they're going, this is who I am. And the reality, when we get confronted that that doesn't work, that that is not enough, that that is the path of doom, people do not always enjoy that. I don't want to give you a false sense. People don't like to know that they don't know who they really are or what they're living for. They don't want to hear that they've been constantly chasing the wrong things and hope that someday when they finally catch it, it will satisfy them. At my house, we've got 2 beautiful black dogs that we mostly like, and a cat that I really don't like, in case anyone wants my perspective on cats. The one cat doesn't mess with one of the dogs, but the littler of the dogs, the cat, who's a boy, likes to mess with her. He likes to chase her tail. The other day, Meg was sitting on the couch, and her name is Ethel, and she crawled up next to Meg, and she sat next to Meg, and the tail was swishing because Meg was loving this. And the cat was sitting up above on the back of the sofa, and all of a sudden, he leapt down onto the seat, and he grabbed a hold of the tail. He caught it. Do you know what happened? Nothing. He didn't eat it. It's not food. He had finally got the very thing that he thought all of this time, if I can just get this. I mean, the chaos in our world that has been caused because that cat has chased that tail. And finally he had it. Nothing happened. And that's the world. Perched, waiting, longing, chaos, all of the stuff, pursuing the thing that when they finally get, it's just a shiny bauble. And then they move on to the next thing. And so our job is to tell them of the excellencies of the one who has called us out of the darkness into the glorious light. It frees us from the bondage of all the other identities. It gives us a purpose that transforms our lives. So I don't know what you do. You might be a CEO or a CFO or a mom or a teacher or a dentist or a construction worker or a realtor or whatever it is. The person who moves this paper from that paper. Those things get to simply become what you do. Because they get to stop being who you are. Because who you are, a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a possessed people. Out of that, everything is changed. Now you do those things in such a way that they declare as excellencies. We get to stop being sort of these numb, bored, right? Medicated people going, I don't know, maybe this, and largely unsatisfied. But our moments get to be captured by a renewed vision of who we actually are. I want to end our time this morning with 2 just real simple, how do we do this? One is we do that in our actions by doing the things that we do. So whether you're a firefighter, a dentist, a mom, a teacher, a scientist, a realtor, a person who pushes this paper to that paper, we do it in a way that reflects His holiness. We do it in a way that says God is God. And so we operate in integrity and in kindness and in mercy and in love and in peace. So love your wife and discipline your children and serve at your local church. See the resources that you've earned as His, and we're stewarding them, right? We get to do the stuff that we do in such a way that reflects that God is God. We get to do the stuff that we do in such a way that reflects that we've been called out from the darkness to the light. Do the stuff you're called to do. But you've also got to speak. We do it in our words by saying why we do it. That means that at a certain point along the way, right, if you're living in a way that reflects his holiness, someone's going to say, "What? Why aren't you doing the things everybody else is doing? Why isn't your attitude the same as everybody else's attitude? Why are you being kind to that person that was not kind to you?" And in that moment, we have a choice. We get to declare the excellencies of the one who has called us out of the darkness and into the marvelous light. And I'll just, on a really practical, very personal way, I have found it much more effective to talk about my own darkness and the light to which I have been called. Know your story. That means part of holiness, part of understanding is recognizing the darkness that we were, where we were at. And seeing the excellencies, right, of his marvelous light that he has called us to. That we have an answer, that we have a thing to say. It's why we should dwell on, think on, study on the excellencies of his mercy, his calling us out of darkness. And we in that moment get to talk about the thing we love most, Jesus himself. Friends, as we think about this, the majestic, holy God that we serve, my prayer has been that we would be in this outpost, right, in this sort of regiment of the holy nation, of the royal priesthood, that we would be a place known as one that celebrates the excellencies of being called out of darkness into light. That would be the thing that characterizes us. And so I'm going to invite you this month, this holiday month, in the busyness of it, to use your words, use your actions. I'm not underselling that. Some of us live, work, and operate in places where just doing in a way that says God is holy and I'm going to do it with integrity is really hard. But when we have those moments, whether it's with our neighbor or with the teacher or with our kids' friend's mom, like those moments that we have, can I invite you to not just invite people to journey, but talk about Jesus. Talk about your reality of the darkness, that you've been called out into the light. May we be a people, a holy nation, a possessed people, bold in proclaiming and declaring the excellencies of our holy God. Let's pray this morning. Father, we come. And Father, I would ask that even in this moment, those things that might divide, those things that might cause us to go, I'm not sure. I don't know, maybe even like that person. I disagree with them about this. Father, would in this moment, would we see ourselves not defined by the stuff that would separate, but defined by the stuff that puts us in the family, calls us royal. And Father, this morning, I would ask in a special way for those who this morning sit here and are like, that's not my reality in any way. I don't feel that. I don't feel like I'm a follower of Jesus. I don't feel like I'm holy. I don't feel like I'm called. I don't feel like I even have been called out of darkness. I'm just still stuck. Father, I pray that even as we've talked this morning, that your Spirit would be moving in them, drawing them to yourself, calling them out of their dark into the light. And Father, I pray that they would have the boldness to ask the person that invited them, the person that they're sitting next to, me when we're finished, and go, I need to talk, I need to know more about how do I come out of the dark and into the light. But Father, for those of us that you've done that, for those of us who that is our reality, may we be bold proclaimers. First in the things that we do, in the actions that we take, in the way we conduct our life and our business and our family and our relationships. And may we be doers. But may we also be speakers. May we be proclaimers. May we be willing to share the name of Jesus with those around us. We pray these things in his name. Amen.